All right, we need to get the curtain raiser for my intro here. Welcome to the live, everyone. Glad to see everybody tuned in. We've, of course, got some big news to discuss today with the judge recusal yesterday that you guys can find news on video recaps. And then if you go to legalaffairsandtrials.com, I've got a story that kind of sums up everything with a link to the ruling. But we are going to be talking with Max Schardt today. Anyone who's been watching the trial is familiar with Mr. Schardt and Mr. Kokomo, too. We're going to be hearing from the world famous Mr. Kokomo. So I'm so glad that Max was able to join us. He represents Shannon Stillwell, one of the 6 defendants on trial. So we're going to be, talking about the news, getting into, really all sorts of stuff about the trial, but we'll be able to take some questions here too. So get Max on stage here. Max, thank you so much for joining us. We've already got 150 people watching. So I think that's 165. I think that's just going to keep going up. So thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you, Meghann. Thank you so much. All I want is more viewers in Doug Weinstein. So as long as I can do better than my friends, that's all good. So I'm happy to be here, and I thank you for having me.
We'll see. We'll see what we can do here. It's a good time, and there's big news to discuss. Where were you when you found out yesterday that Judge Glanville was being recused from the case?
We were waiting. It was kind of like a lot of silence, and none of us really knew when a decision was going to come down. I was actually on the phone with another attorney, and I was having a serious conversation, and my responses weren't making a lot of sense. So I think he could tell I was preoccupied, and then I got him off the phone, read the opinion, and I was very happy.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be. It's a huge victory for everyone, but it also raises all sorts of questions about what's going to happen next here. Can you talk about what you plan to do this week? Is there anything we can expect to see?
If I knew, I would share. Honestly, we don't really know what's going to happen. I think it's known that the case has been reassigned in Fulton County. They call it a wheel. I think at one point there was actually a wheel, like a Wheel of Fortune, and I think there's maybe 16 Superior Court judges in Fulton County, and it just randomly assigned. Now they have a computer that does it, and it was randomly reassigned to another judge. So that's really all I know as far as what's upcoming. I know that certain motions have been filed. I know that certain motions are likely to be filed in the near future, but as far as the time frame of everything, I really don't have any additional information.
Yeah, I mean, like Doug Weinstein said yesterday that he plans to request a mistrial and for bail. But then I've also heard some discussion about, the benefits. What's the best thing for the defendants? Is there a way to continue the trial? That just seems impossible to me, that the trial would continue under another judge. Do you have any thoughts on that?
We are in a very unique situation, and most of the case law out there, when you seek guidance on these issues, a lot of these issues don't come up. Like earlier in the case, this is an example. Earlier in the case, we had a juror that changed their residence and moved to another county, and we were trying to figure out, well, we understand that a juror has to be a resident of Fulton County at the time of jury selection, but what happens if a juror moves mid-trial? And then you say, well, you should be able to find a case about that. But then you think, well, most cases in the criminal arena are 1 week long. So
exactly.
What juror would move during the week they're having jury duty? So this case in the length creates new situations that are a little unknown. So we're going to be looking into that, but I can't imagine that there's that much case law out there regarding this type of situation, just because it's so unique in the amount of time that this case has taken.
Yeah, because it seems like, I mean, a mistrial is a benefit. I mean, the defense is the one that's always asking for a mistrial, but it also seems like, and Doug Weinstein has been upfront about this, that your end goal is an acquittal. You don't just want to have to restart the trial again. You want to get a not guilty verdict from the jury. And it seems like, just from somebody who's been watching from afar, the complex charges, like the murder charges, the RICO charges, the RICO charge, it just seems impossible to get any kind of conviction on that based on what they've presented. So because of that, is there kind of a unique interest in trying to see this continue under the current jury?
That's a great question. As far as I'm concerned, we're winning the trial. As far as I'm concerned, none of the testimony has touched us. It's touched my client, in particular, Shannon Stillwell, but it's touched anyone in any meaningful way. So from that perspective, you don't really want to start over. But at the same time, if something happened that is wrong, you don't want to just let it slide either. And so that's the conundrum that we're facing, is what do we want to happen? And I don't know this for a fact, but there's however many attorneys representing 6 different defendants with their clients may have different interests. So I don't know. I'm looking out for Mr. Stillwell. I'm still thinking everything through. And then the other additional aspect of this is, can you get me the chart? Mm-hmm. The other additional aspect of this is, we feel that there's been error already baked into this case. So I'm certainly going for an acquittal, but at the same time, I don't know. And Attorney Steele said that in his motion. At this point, I don't know what convictions could stand appellate review at this point. So there's a lot of different considerations. I'll put it that way.
Right. And there's been, and we've seen a lot of the errors just kind of in real time as they've come up, but it seems like kind of an overarching appellate theme here is the sheer size of the case in terms of the conspiracy factor. We always hear Bruce Harvey in the back kind of bringing up his motion on that. And I was always wondering, yes, if that would be the big issue on appeal. And obviously it's a little early to talk about that, but could you talk about any of the actual errors? Do you feel comfortable getting into that, or what can you say?
Well, there's been, I'll put it this way. We have the right, the Sixth Amendment right, to confront our accusers. They've been letting in this trial, the convictions, the statements, the pleas of so many people that have not testified, have not been subject to cross-examination, have been let in. And let me just say this, at the risk of sounding like I'm kissing up here, the press has been doing a great job in this case. Press from all different areas, yourself included, and so many others I see at the courthouse every day, and other people that are writing on the internet, and especially the non-traditional media. Yeah. And I think people are starting to see a little bit behind the curtain of the criminal justice system. And when people plead guilty and it's being used, guilty plea, we want to introduce it as evidence of this conspiracy. And I think people are starting to realize, because of the work of the press, that people plead guilty for different reasons. People plead guilty to get out of jail, and even if they're not guilty. And that's a sad reality of our criminal justice system. But I think it's in this particular case, it's really disturbing that people that have been locked in jail for 90 days, 120 days, and are entering pleas just to get themselves out of jail would be later used against other individuals in a RICO case. Yeah. And that's problematic. So that's another issue that I've found a little disturbing about this case.
I will say that the press, when covering a trial, like we can only almost be as good as the attorneys that were reporting on. So one thing that I found in this trial was I thought your guys' line of questioning to the witnesses about jail and why they took the plea deal was like the best I've seen, because that's such a common part of trials, but you just see all different kinds of questioning styles of questioning about it. And some attorneys just don't dig in and give it the kind of seriousness and like slow roast treatment. But we saw it, I think, first of all, with Brian Steele and Trontavious Stevens, where he really went into the conditions in the jail. I mean, everything, his family issues that were going on and all of that. And then didn't you do that same style of questioning with, was it Walter Murphy?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
that's the thing is, like, you know, an everyday person that's watching the trial would be like, well, why would someone plead guilty just to get out of jail? You know, or why would someone plead guilty if they didn't do it, right?
Yeah.
And then you start to understand, okay, well, they can't make bond, and prosecutors saying if you plead guilty, and the defense attorney saying if you plead guilty, you'll go home. Oh, but you also have to say that you also have to plead guilty to the gang count. And then all of a sudden it's being thrown in our face. Oh, well, so-and-so pled guilty to a gang count and it was in furtherance of a gang. And it really was, I want to go home. And the bad thing is some of these pleas are not. Walter Murphy, for instance, or Trontavious Stevens, that you were referencing, they were on the stand so we could ask them about that. But other people and other people's pleas, they haven't taken a stand. So it's very difficult to ask them, why did you enter this plea if YSL is not a gang, or if this was not in furtherance of the gang? And so that's where some of these things that have been coming in have been problematic. And there's been other examples of hearsay that's been labeled as statements by a co-conspirator that have come in, and I just don't believe it's correct. But hopefully we'll never have to have that argument because we'll all be acquitted.
Yeah, exactly. And I like we were saying earlier, this is just kind of remains to be seen. But I mean, one ideal option for you would just be a dismissal under double jeopardy. But under
Right.
the goading standard for prosecutorial misconduct, or something that the prosecutors did, there would have to be some kind of argument that this meeting that led to Judge Glanville's actions that led to the recusal somehow goaded you guys into having to request this mistrial. Is that an accurate summary?
I think that generally speaking, that's, I was just reviewing some of the case on some of the stuff earlier, and I think that's generally an accurate summary of where the case law is on that. But we're that's something that potentially could be litigated in the future. So we'll find out.
So what are you comfortable sharing about Shannon Stillwell's reaction to all this? Have you talked to him? How did he find out about the recusal?
So I cannot speak to that. What I will say is that I met Shannon in the early spring of 2022. And you can just imagine, everyone sees me and they say, oh, Max, I'm not envied. We're not envied for being involved in a 2-year case. And I get that. And I appreciate the support of the bar and other people that have shown me a lot of support and love. But when you think about these young men that have been on trial now for since Mr. Stillwell's been in custody for 28 months, something like that at this point, and have been coming to trial, been brought to the courthouse. And that's a tough life to live for this long for these gentlemen and have their life completely on pause. So I'm sure we are happy that we're seeing some movement, but there can't really be any satisfaction until people are free. And that's what I'll say. And it's still a rough situation that Shannon's in and the rest of these gentlemen until we have a conclusion to this case.
Right, right. Because we can, we could possibly expect motions for bail under the new judge, at least. I mean, Doug Weinstein's looking at that, but there's no guarantee that anything's going to be granted. I mean, there needs to be some kind of adjudication to this case for him to really be free and continue on, right?
Right. So, this is one step, but, speaking for myself, I'm not doing any victory laps or anything like that because there's a lot of work to be done. This is just one step.
Yeah, yeah. And are you going to file a motion for bond? I mean, I know we were talking about how this is up in the air and it remains to be seen what's going to happen, but is that one thing you can say, or does that remain to be seen?
That remains to be seen. There are other motions that I would like to argue first before we even get to that. Arguing bond would presuppose that this prosecution is continuing, and I'm not willing to concede that that is in fact what's going to happen. We're going to have to sort that out first.
Yeah. Yeah. Has there been any talk about when you might be back in court? Has there been any word from the prosecutors, or, I mean, you don't meet and confer, I don't think, but there's been no movement from them.
I might learn from an Instagram post or a tweet or an X, whatever we're calling it now, from you. I don't know anything regarding the scheduling that you don't know at this point.
Yeah. Well, what we were at, we were with Woody's testimony when this was all going on. We had maybe a couple more days of direct from him than we were going to get into cross. But how much more of the prosecution's case remains here? Are we about halfway through, or is a little less?
I think if you go by the witness list, every time I think that things are going to speed up, they slow down. So I think we're probably about halfway done with the case at this point. With Mr. Copeland's testimony, I don't know. I don't know where they're going, but I will say this, if you would allow me, about Mr. Copeland. I don't know Mr. Copeland. I'm not friendly with Mr. Copeland, but one thing I'll say about Mr. Copeland that I've appreciated is I believe that somehow throughout this process, he's gotten through to the press, the public, hopefully the jurors, that kind of the behind the scenes of what happens in the criminal justice system, what happens in the interrogation room, the idea that, you always view me as a liar until I say what you want me to say. And then all of a sudden I'm telling the truth. And that's a dirty little secret about our system that somehow, and I can't really explain how, but somehow Mr. Copeland has been the vessel to get that message across. And I think that message is coming across clear to many people in the public, and I appreciate that. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like, and especially he's building off kind of a string of remarkable witnesses. I mean, D'Angelo White stands out to me. We didn't get to see him on camera, which is one thing I was reminded of. Somebody in the comments was asking about jail conditions for the defendants. And, when the cameras turn on, they're all just there in their street clothes. And, we miss the transport process, which I know is such an exhausting process. At least people who work in the courts around here always tell me that they prefer it if the defendants are out of custody, because doing a trial with in custody defendants is so much more harder logistically. What are we missing in terms of transport? I mean, what is their morning like when they're being transported to court? You guys arrive 8:39, and are they in the holding cells, or how does that work?
I don't want to comment on the where any of the gentlemen are coming from or how anyone gets to court. I don't want to comment on that at
Sure,
this time.
sure,
That makes
sure.
sense.
But
But I will. I'll just say this: it's going through this process. Um, I'm thinking of my worst enemy, if I have one. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Um, Going through this process, and as I said, it's been a long 2+ years for those 6 gentlemen that are at trial. And I said in the beginning of this case to other lawyers, I said, our system is so broken that we're not going to all be tried together because these other gentlemen are not going to have lawyers in time. The state that is charging people with crimes is not going to provide people with lawyers in time. And then I'm hearing, 2 years later, after arrest, the other gentlemen that have been severed, some of them are just getting their attorneys now or still haven't received attorneys. And I'm like, what are we doing? What are we doing? I think Judge Dempsey's in charge of that group of individuals, and I'm sure he's working hard. It's not his fault,
Mhm.
but we sit here and you know, I'm not taking anything away, but Brittany Griner was in Russia, and everyone was concerned about her rights, and as we should be. But here in Georgia, we're sitting here and we're just completely ignoring the fact that individuals. I was retained. Okay, so
Mhm.
luckily, my client had the resources to hire an attorney relatively quickly. But individuals that don't have those resources have been languishing in 901 Rice Street for 2 years without an attorney to come talk to them about anything. I can't even imagine that. And that's where we're at.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely seems wrong. I was watching the last. It was a potential change of plea, but nobody ended up taking a plea deal with it. It had to have been Judge Dempsey, and he mentioned that there was a real lack of available attorneys capable in the defense bar of taking this. And it's there's something to be said about the pipeline for people who want to be attorneys who would like to work in criminal defense work in Georgia. But it seems like your public defender's offices aren't funded very well. So the options for getting started and getting experience are a little more limited there. Is that part of the problem?
I think I think the problem is funding, and I believe that. How can I put this? I believe that there's some attorneys that are willing to get involved for a short term, if they're looking for work, but then it quickly becomes apparent, at least with complicated cases, to really handle the case like you're we'd want you to. Um, the funding does not make any sense, and then that person says, okay, well, I'm gonna I'm changing jobs or I have a new career opportunity, so I'm going to withdraw on the case. And there's nothing that the Public Defender Standards Council can really say to them at that point. And then, people get, passed around. And so it's not just this case. I've represented people. I've been asked to take cases for people that have been locked up for, over a year without any meaningful legal assistance. Now, the Public Defender Standards Council might have someone in there to show up to court, but not to really actively represent them. It's kind of a placeholder, and it's just unconscionable. And I don't know why we stand for it, but and that's why I thanked you for shining light, you and your colleagues for shining light on what's going on in our trial, because that was happening for several years before anyone realized what was going on. I knew what was going on. I talked about it. I said it was horrible, but who am I? And
Yeah.
so the press started to catch up on that. I'd say about 2 years ago, about the people languishing in Rice Street without any representation, and then supposedly changes were made, but obviously the changes didn't go far enough because we're still in this situation.
And where is the U.S. Department of Justice in relation to this? Has there ever been a patterns of practices investigation into Fulton County or anything like that?
I have no idea about that. I have no idea about that. But it's a shame because on an individual level, we always we see a press release, someone wrongfully convicted man released after 30 years, and it will get thousands and thousands of likes on Instagram. Oh, we love that. Oh, justice fun. But we don't want to do it, the work that needs to be done on the front end to make sure that next person is not wrongfully convicted. And, I don't get it, but we need to do something about it. We need to do something about it.
Yeah. Well, so how long have you been a criminal defense attorney? Is that what you've always been since you've been a member of the bar?
Yes.
Criminal defense work?
Yes. And 17, 18 years. I started in Columbia, South Carolina. And then I moved with my better half to Atlanta. And she's a very successful lawyer. And so I moved with her to Atlanta. That's where she's from. And I've been practicing here for 15, 16 years, whatever it is now.
Nice. Does she do
only done criminal defense?
Did your wife do civil law or work for a big law firm? Or I don't know if you want to talk about that.
I'll plead the fifth on that.
Okay. And where did you go to law school?
That, but
so are you a Duke grad? Is it Duke Law or Duke undergrad?
I did. Yeah, I'm a Duke. Yep, I'm at Duke Law School, University of South Carolina, Gamecock undergrad, Duke Law, and that's where I met my wife at Duke.
So what made you want to be an attorney, first of all, and then why criminal defense work?
Well, I could answer that one of two ways. The cynical way is to say, well, I summered doing civil work and I could barely stay awake. Okay. So I knew that my opportunities to be a lawyer were somewhat limited by my interest in certain aspects of the law. Criminal law, I think the first time I really started to think about it, and I remember I said this in my first interview with the Richland County Public Defender's Office to my boss, Doug Strickler, back in 2004. I went to school with like the nicest kid in the world, just a video game guy, nicest kid in the world, good basketball player. And then one day we were playing basketball and he had an ankle monitor on. And I was like, what is going on? And this kid wouldn't harm a fly. And he had been charged federally because he was such a computer geek that other people had apparently convinced him to counterfeit money using or attempt to. And I don't think it was a particularly good job of doing it. But I was like, how in the world is this guy being prosecuted by the federal government of all things? And he's out and he's the same sweet guy and he's playing basketball and he's got an ankle monitor on. And he started telling me all the horror stories about how lost you feel in custody and how thankful you are when an attorney actually comes to see you, even for an hour every month. And it's just like you're tired of the outside world. And, I started to realize how important those things were. So that was one of the things that really got me thinking about criminal defense.
And so one way I've described like the prosecutor's approach to this trial is it seems like they're not bad prosecutors in that they're probably really good when they're doing, a single murder case, a single robbery case. But it seems like they're approaching this as they're proving each overt act like it's its own trial and then moving on to the next one, which is one reason it's so long. Would you agree with that? Or would you describe what they're doing a little differently?
I am going to say that the prosecutors are doing a perfect job, and if I don't think they're doing a perfect job, I'm certainly not going to tell them how to do a better job at this point. So I'm not respectfully, I'm not going to answer that question because I don't think it's in my client's best interest to uh, pontificate about how the prosecutors are doing. So I'm just going to leave that alone.
Okay. And that's one good reminder here is how does you or how do you have to kind of constantly be on guard and kind of be willing to adjust your strategy as the case changes? I mean, do you see that a lot in this trial, particularly because of the size, or has it been pretty steady all the way through?
Well, no, it hasn't. It definitely hasn't been steady. I will say that this is kind of it's in some ways advantageous that there's 6 clients and however many attorneys because it slows everything down. In a trial by yourself, if you're the sole attorney, something could happen unforeseen and you're kind of caught off guard, and then you have to adjust and do your best to adjust, and you might not have time to think everything through. In this particular situation, there's 2 things going on. First of all, 6 people are doing cross-examination. 6 people are objecting. 6 people are thinking about these issues. So that's helpful. It slows the process down when unforeseen events come up. But also, and this is going to sound, kind of like I'm kissing up, but these other attorneys are just a great support system. I mean, I knew Brian, and
Yeah.
of course, we all know what a great attorney Brian is. I knew Brian. I did not know Doug. I knew Keratin, but not nearly to the level I know now. I never met Nicole Westmoreland. I knew Bruce Harvey, but to a limited degree. Keith Adams, I knew. But I've gotten to know all these people so much more intimately and better now. And we're at a situation, we all have our different views. We all have our different interests with our clients, but we're able to lean on each other. And that has been really, like, if I can take one positive from this experience right now, is just relationships that I've developed with all my colleagues. That has been really helpful. And that when something unforeseen happens, who else would I want there but Brian and Keith and Bruce and Nicole and Keratin
Yeah.
and Keratin Jr. and all them to say, hey, what should we do? What should I
Yeah.
do? And then you get so much input, and it's really invaluable. So I'm very thankful for them in this process.
I've noticed especially that, I mean, it's the proximity of where you sit, but you said you didn't even know Nicole before the case, but you two seem to share a lot of insights and stuff. At least when the cameras are on you, you seem to have a really cordial relationship there. So, can you talk about?
She yells at me. She yells at me.
Okay.
That's pretty much what happens throughout the entire trial. She yells at me. She gets on me for things I'm not doing. She complains that I type too loud. But yeah, in all seriousness, we do have a very cordial relationship. But it's I told my wife this. I was like, I kind of have a wife at work in this trial. So.
What is your communication like with them? I mean, I know you don't want to get into it too much, but I mean, are you kind of in constant contact, bouncing ideas off each other, or because you're serving your own client's interests, is it a little bit more limited how you're communicating? What can you say about that?
No, it's not limited at all. I'm friends. I'm friends with all of them, but I'm very close friends with Brian. So, I talk to Brian all the time. It doesn't even have to do anything about the case. It can be about life. It can be about my family. It can be about his family. It can be about the Yankees. So we're in constant contact. I'm in constant contact with Doug and the rest of them. I love them all. So we certainly bounce ideas off each other. I'm not going to pretend that we don't. But we've kind of, we're hanging out with each other all day, every day for
Yeah.
a year, 2 years. So yeah, we've all become close.
Have you found that the conditions that you're working under, the problems with Judge Glanville, the antagonistic relationship with DA Love, especially, has that brought you all more together?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so.
It's the shared experiences that
Right.
you're all
Right.
dealing with, both personally and legally. There, somebody was pointing out in the chat that Judge Glanville really seems to not like you. Is there any thought that he had a turning point on you, or can you talk about when if you thought the judge developed any kind of particular view of you?
I've tried a case before in front of Judge Glanville. I don't have any bad history with Judge Glanville. I don't. I can't think of anything. I understand. I'm not. I see things. I know what people have been saying. I don't have any bad history about him. In my nature, I'm not. My nature is not to assume bad motives in the worst of people. So when I get yelled at, I don't assume that it's a grudge. I don't assume that it's intentional. And a lot of people have reached out to me and said, you need to stick up for yourself. You need to stand up for yourself. And I understand that. And I don't want people to think that I'm a pushover. But, my focus has been about Shannon. It's not really about me. If Shannon can go home, people can yell at me all day, every day. I'm good with that.
Yeah, if it makes the judge feel better to yell at you and he's a little more fair in the trial, then who knows. But I don't think you guys would say that that's what was going on. It seemed, I talked about this with Doug last night. It seemed like the inherent problem with the case is how long it is. And I don't know how much you can get into what your previous case was with Judge Glanville, but is it safe to say it was maybe no case is normal, but was it normal in terms of the length? Are we talking this was a trial that was like 2 weeks or something?
Yeah, it was a probably 4-day trial. So
yeah.
It was a much more typical case. So yeah, that could be the difference. And again, I don't want to impute. My interest is not to make Judge Glanville look bad or good, and I don't take any pleasure in having to move. I know I didn't sign the motion, but we have the Harvey rule in effect, and the Harvey rule is when someone brings a motion, everyone's, unless you specifically opt out, everyone's assumed to have been part of the motion. So I had another member of the press reach out to me after Doug and Brian filed their motions to recuse and said, why aren't you filing a motion to recuse? Is it safe to assume you don't support their motion? I said, no, I do support their motion. It's just the Harvey rule was in effect, and it didn't seem like an effective use of time to file a duplicative motion when it's already on the record. So, so I certainly supported the motion to recuse. I think it was very necessary, and I think that Judge Krause made ultimately the appropriate ruling. But again, at this point, my focus is not at all. I know why people ask me that, but my focus is not at all on Judge Glanville. And, I'll probably be in front of Judge Glanville again, and I'd want him to be a fair judge to me. And so I'm not trying to impute bad motives on that man at all. I respect him, and, I wish him the best.
Yeah. What about the new Judge Ingram? Do you have experience with her? She's been on the bench few years less than Glanville. Glanville's been on the bench since 2005, and she's 2018. So not as many chances to appear before her. But have you had experience with her?
Right. I have not tried a case. No, I have not tried a case in front of Judge Ingram. I've had cases in front of Judge Ingram. She's always been very pleasant, very thoughtful. I'm fond of Judge Ingram as a judge. So that's my information. I've never tried a case in front of her.
Yeah, yeah. You know, one thing I've been wanting to know, and I'm anticipating you won't be able to, and you won't want to speak on behalf of Brian Steele, but when he on June 10th, when he was actually taken into custody for, I mean, maybe 40 minutes or so, he was back. Was he actually back in a holding cell? I mean, I'd love to just be able to ask him this himself, but he was definitely in custody.
My understanding, yeah, my understanding is he was in a holding cell. It's weird because, I care so much about Brian as, an individual and a friend. So, when all that was going on, it's almost like people that are witnesses to something say they kind of black out and don't remember too much. I was so focused on what was going on in the case, what was going on with my friend, what the next step to make sure my friend is not incarcerated for 20 days. I was so focused on those things. Like, I honestly don't have much of a recollection other than I've seen a tape of him giving me his car keys and then he disappeared. So yes, I think the record, the video reflects that he was in fact in the holding cell. But other than that, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's important when recounting the acts of June 10th that we emphasize that while yes he got his jail sentence stayed, which I think everyone just kind of assumed that the appellate court would act on that, would stay that sentence pending appeal. He was in custody for a little bit, and at the time it was really unknown up until basically court adjourned at 7:30 p.m. whether he was going to go to jail that night. And if Glanville had ordered him to jail that night, it's not like the Supreme Court would have had time to step in the 30 minutes between court adjourning and him having to go to jail. So it seemed like it was a real cliffhanger of whether he would actually be taken into custody. Did I accurately convey the stress of that moment?
The man handed me his car keys and gave me instructions. So it was as real as that to me. So I didn't know of any magic ending that was coming, that it was in the bag. I didn't know what was going to happen. And quite frankly, I thought that Keith Adams was going to go up there and the same thing was going to happen. And I thought I was going to go up third and the same thing was going to happen. So I was, I texted my wife and said, I might not be home tonight.
Wow.
And I assumed that I was going to be in the holding cell with Brian and Keith.
Wow.
So it didn't play out that way, thankfully. And I'm glad too many people spend time in jail. I don't need to prove my cred by going to serve a silly sentence. So I'm glad it didn't happen. But but I thought that was a real possibility.
Yeah. And I know Brian was quite memorable when he asked that he be housed with Jeffery, his client, because, they're in constant communication. And Glanville said, I mean, he didn't really have any power over that. But what are the chances of that actually happening? I mean, if he'd been taken to jail that night, I mean, I don't know. Would you have been housed with Shannon?
Would I have been? I would have asked. But I don't know. I don't know what would happen. I think that probably there's some accommodations maybe that are. I don't think that we would just be randomly sent to a cell, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I've never been held in contempt. So I don't know how that would have played. That to happen, it could have been done.
And do you see, at least that moment, it seemed to me that was the moment that the national press started paying attention to this trial a little bit more. I mean, they should have been paying attention to it all along, but did you notice a significant uptick in national attention after June 10th?
I did. And we're really at an interesting time because, we've been kind of screaming about this, not just about, I know a lot of the focus has been on, the way people have been treated and different things that have happened. But, just from the get-go, like the RICO statute and just the inherent unfairness of that. And I just kind of feel like things did start to change around that point. And people are paying more attention now. We're on the radar. People are aware that people that normally have faith in the system and the institutions, around the system, when they see this case, I see more and more people questioning it. Not just, quote unquote, young thug fans, but people that just believe in fundamental fairness, believe in the Constitution. And then, when Alec Baldwin, Shannon Stillwell and Alec Baldwin could not be more dissimilar in many ways. But then when that happens and Alec Baldwin's case gets dismissed, then, I see people saying, well, what about YSL? What about Jeffery? What about Shannon? And, and I try to remind everyone, well, there's other people too. What about Lil Rod? What about DeMonte? What about the two Quays? And so I think people are starting to pay attention. And that's why I appreciate y'all bringing the truth out to the people, because I think there's just a lot of people that have concerns about the way our criminal justice system is run and have been paying attention to this case. And it's kind of confirmed some of the fears that we've all had.
Yeah. I mean, from my standpoint, when people ask about the case or when I'm trying to convey the craziness of the case, I always focus on the size of it. And then it's, I think, important to include that some of these defendants were severed against their will. So this crazy long trial is actually supposed to just repeat itself over and over again for these severed defendants. But what else? What are some other aspects of the discovery violations? I was saying, I mean, other than I know there's been a lot of filings about this, but is there some kind of centralized database of like, could we just have a handy list of discovery violations you guys have complained about over the years? Because I know there's been a lot of complaints, but off the top of my head, I couldn't point to one single instant. Just that there's been a lot.
So, well, we all have our different complaints. Obviously, Brian got into that big argument, which Brian ended up being completely right, that Adrian Bean was in fact at the hospital. And where's the reports from that? My thing was, and I know people have been saying this, Max loves police reports, Max loves videos, Max loves transcripts. I do. Those things exist for a reason. And with Dennis, Investigator Dennis and Investigator Gaither, I can remember this in particular, I was asking, where's the reports? And they say I wrote one, because at first I'm criticizing, saying, well, if it's so important, why didn't you write a report? Oh, I wrote one. Then I say, well, where is it? Well, the state should have it, and then the state doesn't have it, and then we all just chalk it up. Right. Oh, well, there was the hack of 2018 or whatever, and everyone just says, oh, it's due to the hack. And it's like, well, how do we know it's due to the hack? Like, I don't think it's due to the hack. Like, what proof do we have that it's due to the hack? And why would there not be a paper written report about this if it's so important? So that's been my frustration. It's like, you complain that you don't have a report, and then it's like, well, if they have a report, I'm sure they'll give it to you. And you're kind of left saying, well, they haven't given it to me, and the officer's saying there's a report. So we have a problem here. So there's been several instances like that have stood out to me. And I'm not, and to be clear, I get the fact that Investigator Dennis moved to a different jurisdiction, Investigator Gaither retired. I'm not putting it on them. I don't expect an investigator to just hold on to old reports for 10 years, but it has to be somewhere, because, you're going to bring this case from 2013 events, 2014, 2015. There has to be some sort of safeguard to make sure you have reports.
I'm reminded of this line of questioning because, especially with Detective Gaither, I mean, this is an important line of questioning, but I'm struck by the fact that what I really remember about this isn't this when there was the exchange where the detective got on you and said that you were being condescending to her, and then the judge kind of got into you about it, and it just kind of, to me, highlights that there's such a focus on that. There's not so much a focus on, these discovery violations, that kind of thing. It's just like this. And the judge would kind of participate in it, like these personality clashes, and he would kind of exasperate it and fan the flames on it. Am I conflating those two incidents? Or?
No, I don't think so. And the thing is, I'm a lot of things. I don't think I'm condescending. I mean, you could say a lot of things about me. I don't tend to be that. And I wasn't being condescending to that investigator. I think it was Investigator Gaither. What was going on is I thought I was asking questions, and the state kept objecting, saying things were vague.
Right.
And I didn't believe my questions were vague, and my frustration wasn't directed at all to the investigator. So I don't know how the conclusion was made that I was being condescending to Investigator Gaither. I think Investigator Gaither's plenty smart. I think, I don't have any bad things to say about Investigator Gaither, other than the fact that I was trying to find the reports and no one could find the reports. But again, I don't put that on her.
Yeah, I mean, it just seemed like there was such a focus from the judge and from her on the form instead of the substance, when actually, if you kind of get into the substance of what you were talking about, it's pretty crucial stuff here. But
right. That's why I felt.
It seemed like, we hear from you. You're probably the most, you and Brian Steele and then Keith Adams are the most active of the attorneys. And can you, without revealing work product or too much planning, can you talk about how you approach exams? I mean, how do you look at a witness list and decide who you're really gonna go into, and then who is going to be kind of the work of another defense attorney? Obviously, it just depends on your client's role, but is that something you talk about with the other attorneys?
Well, in this, I mean, so far in the trial, there's if the trial continues, there'll be parts of the trial that do not directly or even indirectly involve my client Shannon, other than he's charged with RICO. But so far in the trial, most of the witnesses have involved Shannon to a large degree. And reality is, Shannon, I'll say it today, I'll say it tomorrow, he is innocent of the charges in this indictment. But the reality is, if you read the indictment, Shannon has more charges than anyone. Okay, yeah. Shannon's charged with 2 independent murders on this indictment. So I'm going to be active. That's what I have to do to represent my client. Couple that with my hyperactive tendencies and my inability to sit still, and you end up with me being involved a lot. And also, a lot of it is the background. You need to kind of set the tone that, this isn't going to be easy. So some of the things that came out in the beginning of the trial, even if it didn't directly involve Mr. Stillwell, I'm going to challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to challenge on principle. And, at some point, you in the beginning, I was like, should I make it clear to the jury, even though that I'm putting up a stink with this witness, should I make it clear to the jury that this incident, even the allegations, don't involve my client? And I said, well, how would that look? Because then it looks like I'm trying to suggest that other people were involved. So I don't do that. I just trust that the jury is going to realize sometimes I'm dealing with a witness and I got questions for that witness, even though the witness doesn't have anything directly to do with Shannon.
And how unique were the confrontation issues? Right? I know we heard that from Brian Steele a lot. In the first real argument I remember was over the Drop in Jewels tape, where he wanted to play Drop in Jewels for Tick on Cross to ask him about it, but he wasn't allowed under the rule of completeness. And he seemed to acknowledge that the rule of completeness did on its face exclude that, but one exception to that should have been the length of the trial and the idea that his chance to bring this up again for the jury is not going to be in 6 days, it's going to be in 6 months. Is that, how did the length of the trial pose like unique challenges in that regard?
Well, that's a interesting question. It is very unique because we all make, just it's human nature. We get a first impression of something or someone, and then it kind of enters our brain that way and it becomes fixed. So the challenge is obviously towards the back end of the trial, after the state presents their case, or maybe later in the state's case, witnesses will come in that will shed light on certain things. Or maybe if we want, we're not required to, but if we want, we'll shed light on certain things by presenting evidence. But the problem is the passage of time in between when someone's first exposed to something and then when we ultimately clean it up is just a lot to ask of a juror to have that recall. Heck, I can't even remember, I take very good notes and I go over them, but it's tough for me to recall all the witnesses and what they said. So I don't, and I had the background and the context of everything when it was stated, these jurors, that's difficult. So that is a concern and I don't want to speak for Brian, but sometimes you do want to clear things up on the front end so that that idea that may become fixed in the juror's mind never enters the juror's mind because it's clarified immediately.
Yeah, I mean,
obviously that's a unique challenge if a case is long. If it's a 4-day trial, I really don't. If the state is going to present something in a less than honest way, I'm fine with it. I love it because then I'm going to say, well, 4 days later, this is what happened, and they lied about it to you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a little bit more difficult when 6, 8, 9 months pass, and then you got to go back and address something, and everyone's like, "What was said?"
Yeah. So there's the length of the trial, and then just the substance of what they were talking about. I mean, it seemed like one huge warning sign for the prosecutors is when Donovan Thomas's own mother is getting confused going over the family tree and testimony. The idea that the jury is just supposed to remember this stuff and connect it all to the testimony that they're hearing later seemed a little much. But I will say, as somebody who's watching this from afar, I've learned a lot about the politics of Atlanta and Fulton County, but then also some weird history of the Atlanta Police Department and just some red flags. As somebody who covered the Spokane Police Department that had tons of problems and was, who even knows what they were doing up there all the time. But the fact that all the detectives were moonlighting, had extra jobs. And I mean, Detective Dennis even testified it was because his salary was so piss poor. I mean, is there something to be said about what was going on in the Atlanta Police Department with all this stuff? And the fact that these guys say that they're retired, but really it looks like they just took jobs in other jurisdictions. And then a lot of this stuff, when you're hearing about this, it's like, okay, if this was such a big deal, why wasn't this charged back in 2015? And it's like, well, the detectives who were investigating this back in 2015 seem to have a lot of baggage. What am I getting into here? Is this just an outsider kind of observing with a real facial observance of Fulton County, or?
Well, there's a long history with the Atlanta Police Department. There's a lady named Catherine Johnston who lived on Neal Street on the west side of Atlanta, whose house was burglarized by police serving a faulty warrant one day, and she allegedly shot at who she thought were intruders, and she was shot dead. She was something like 92 years old. Okay, that was Red Dogs running every drug dealer out of Georgia, I think is what it stands for, or something like that. Okay, that's the historical context of all this. So when you hear officers now want to say they were Red Dog because people in Atlanta, presumably people on the jury, know what that means. And
Yeah.
so then they relabeled it Apex. I think they call it Apex now. I'm not certain about that, but I think that's what became Apex. And so there is a history. There is a history with the community. There's a history of distrust. And I'm not saying all police officers, that's not me. But I am saying that there were events that happened, and there's a history to all of this. And so you have that, and then you also have retention problems with APD. And I don't, it seems normal to me, but maybe it's abnormal. This is all I know. But yes, when you go to the store, when you go to Target in Atlanta, when you go to the liquor store in Atlanta, when you go to the Braves game, you're going to see off-duty police officers making extra money on the side in uniform. That's just kind of normalized to me. I don't
Yeah.
know how it is in other jurisdictions, so that doesn't surprise me so much. And yeah, it is also true that apparently there were homicide investigators that retired and then were rehired on some sort of contract basis. I don't know, to help younger investigators or whatever. I think that was the deal with Quinn and Velasquez. So there's a lot going on here, but as a member of the press, the Red Dog story is a real story in Atlanta history, and
It was sounded like a roving civil rights violation when I heard just a brief description of it. I think it was Detective Quinn that, or
right.
somebody talked about it. I was like, that sounds extremely problematic.
Right. And it was, everyone was proud to be Red Dog, Red Dog, Red Dog. We're running drug dealers out. And then all of a sudden no one wanted to be Red Dog. And then we're rebranding it as something else. But that's just kind of how it went. Hopefully, and I don't have inside knowledge on this, so I'm not going to, say too much about it. Hopefully some of the procedures and everything else changed besides the name. But yeah, if you go to Neal Street in Atlanta, it's probably 8 minutes from the courthouse. It's in a neighborhood that's a little bit run down, but you still see a mural of Miss Johnston on that house.
Wow. Another thing that surprised me was when they brought the recusal motion for Judge Krause to try to get her recused from the recusal motions over the $2,000 campaign donation. I was just surprised that incumbent judges in Fulton County feel the need to fundraise at all, let alone like $167,000 that she'd raised for reelection, when the thinking is, at least in Orange County Superior Court, Los Angeles County Superior Court, the incumbent judges are pretty much given to get reelected. So there isn't really any campaigning going on. But obviously that's different in Fulton County. Has it been like that for a while?
There's generally, in my experience, not too many incumbent judges that are challenged. For instance, and I'm just using this as an example, Judge Glanville, I believe that he was up on the ballot this year, and no one challenged him. That's pretty standard and normal. I know that Judge Krause had a challenger and she won re-election. But this is not my expertise, but my understanding of the process is the goal is to raise money so people don't challenge you. So you're not, quote unquote, the weakest link, and people that want to challenge someone will go on to the next person. So that's my understanding of it, but I don't know too much about it.
Yeah. Well, obviously the $2,000 didn't sway Judge Krause to try to protect Judge Glanville at all. Were you surprised at all at the ruling on that, or at least how she reached it? Because, I mean, as Doug Weinstein said last night, he disagrees with some of what she said in that ruling, but in the end, she came to the right result. But what are your thoughts?
Well, let me first say I've appeared in front of Judge Krause. Judge Krause, I'm thinking of one, but there's really several cases, has shown me incredible kindness, has shown an incredibly open mind dealing with my clients. So I think Judge Krause is a very good judge, and I like Judge Krause personally. That being said, I don't believe that an ex parte, I believe, and I'm not quoting, it was, the ruling was an appearance of impropriety. I can't sit here and say that I don't think there was any issues with an ex parte meeting that I wasn't notified about happening, involving a witness that was sworn in to testify against my client. And then when I saw the transcript, usually I say, well, just release the transcript because, sunlight disinfects everything and we'll get to the bottom of it. It's probably not as bad. The
Mhm.
cover up is usually worse, but the transcript was pretty bad in my
Yeah.
view. So, I'm glad it was released. I think it was problematic. The
Well,
judge made a ruling, and I respect that ruling. And ultimately, I'm glad that Judge Krause made the ruling that she did. But, I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't think that there was an actual issue and just an appearance. I believe there was an actual issue.
one thing I've wondered, and this goes back to the unique problems posed by the sheer size of the case, is strategy wise. And I remember Doug Weinstein said he's not willing to say that Judge Glanville never would have told you of the ex parte. But it had been maybe 3 hours since it happened when he was confronted about it. And he had not told you about it at all. And the directions on that are that he immediately informs counsel or as soon as possible. So it seems like immediately is a lot more of an objective word than some of those time words that we have in terms of subjectivity. But I'm wondering if you would waited and confronted him about it after the cross-examination had began, could it be argued? I think there'd be a pretty good argument that there was a Brady violation, because there's clearly Brady material in the transcript, but you can't say it was a Brady violation because it was released and you have it before cross-examination. Although you could argue that maybe you needed it for some objections or or just how to handle the direct exam. But the sheer size of the case makes it
Right.
so it's not like Cross would have been that afternoon. Cross is going to be in like 3 weeks. And as Brian Steele said when he confronted Judge Glanville about it, he feels he has a constitutional duty to bring this forward as soon as it happens. But I mean, that was just kind of me spitballing about the Brady violation.
Yeah, no, I agree. Essentially, as I understand it, what you're asking is, could we have sat on it and see if it became a bigger issue in some ways? And I think Brian did not act on his own in doing that. I think I know I wanted to know what was going on, and Brian articulated that very well. But we're trying to win this case. We're trying to be as prepared as we can to address the witness on the stand. We're not strategizing for appellate issues or to create appellate issues. And quite frankly, in my estimation, there has been Brady violations. So where have Brady violations gotten us? Not too far. And so, I just wanted to know what was going on, so I could best deal with what was right in front of me. And I think the rest of the attorneys did as well.
And before that, can we? What are the biggest Brady violations that have occurred? Just in terms of I mean, we talked about some discovery violations, but just in terms of pointing to what do you think stands out the most?
Well, there's reports. There's all sorts of, and this is the problem when you have. I think it's fair to say that in some ways law enforcement went about things in a more informal manner than we would expect. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but there's been many conversations that did not take place in an interrogation room that were videotapes. We hear about one witness, the gentleman involved in the Adrian Bean situation. We hear about a recording being erased. We hear about Mr. Copeland meeting with people at Turner Field. We hear about all these different meetings where there's no documentation of. And Brady, most people think, oh, Brady means you have the DNA of someone else, on the crime scene, they need to hand that over, or the DNA doesn't match the accused, they need to hand it over. But it also deals with impeachment. So every time a witness says something that's contradictory to what they've said previously, that's
Yes.
impeachment. That's Brady. So we have all these informal statements where we don't have reports, and all these meetings that there's not even documentation of, that we hear about through Kenneth Copeland just kind of talking, sometimes talking on, I was watching YouTube, sometimes talking about, oh, I met with so-and-so here. We had, he was on YouTube talking about his time in the federal system and all these bizarre meetings. And we just don't have any documentation of any of that. So I don't have a lot of faith that we've received everything that we're supposed to have. Where we go from there, I'm not sure. But, it's troubling because the law says we're supposed to have.
Yeah. And I think the Alec Baldwin case, at least I think the criminal defense bar is hoping that's kind of a wake-up call, or at least the judge's endorsement of Brady evidence there was pretty strong. But it's just a matter of how does that translate to other courts.
Right. Because in that case, essentially, as I understand it, the prosecutor was essentially saying, well, I didn't hand it over because I didn't deem it important. And it's like, well, it's not only you that gets to decide what's important. We get to decide. We get to choose our defense. We get to decide what's important too. And if you never even give it to us to make that determination, then that's fundamentally unfair.
Well, and it seemed like Glanville, I mean, I can remember some quotes from him where it's like he talks a good talk, but he doesn't really follow up the walk because he would never really do anything about it when you guys would complain. But I remember his speech where he was obviously talking about Fonnie Willis, where he said your DA used to be, he used to do cases with her all the time, and that she would tell him, you can have my whole file, because if you can beat me with it, then you deserve to win. And it was like, okay, that sounds great, but where is the enforcement of that in this case? And it was the same with him talking about how, oh, why can't you be more like federal practitioners? It's like, well, probably because the judge doesn't have any kind of standards close to what federal practitioners are forced with. I mean, were you guys kind of working within the constraints of the system? Like you could have done differently elsewhere?
There's the system as in the way what the law says, and there's the system as the way people are used to doing it. And I think in this case, again, I don't mean to be a kiss up, but again, this case has a certain following and it's been televised live, on the internet for thousands of people to see, maybe hundreds of thousands. And so a lot of the stuff that's normalized doesn't necessarily fall through the cracks here. And I think that maybe just everyone in general, and defense attorneys, prosecutors, judges, and I'm not singling anyone out, need to really evaluate kind of if we've gotten used to doing things a certain way, and, oh, that's okay because no one's ever complained about it before, so why wouldn't that be okay? With the ex parte meeting, I mean, I don't believe that was okay. Okay. But am I going to sit here and say, well, in Fulton County Courthouse, that's the only time something like that's ever happened?
Yeah.
I can't say that. I don't know, but I think things like that happen when we allow it to be normalized. And hopefully this is just a reset. And hopefully Alec Baldwin's case is just a reset for, maybe we're cutting corners. And I'm not blaming, again, I'm not putting on anyone. It's just as a system. And defense attorneys have a role in that too. If we allow things to happen, they're going to happen. And so that's why, when Brian stood up, it was brave.
Yes. Yes.
Because there's not a huge history of people just standing up and calling things out. But that's what needs to happen to kind of reset sometimes, I believe.
Well, and one thing I've noticed from covering courts over the years, you learn that there really is no centralized database of how to track all this stuff. I mean, you can look up case law, but there's no way to find out. It's like, okay, how many judges in the last week dismissed this charge? I mean, I'm sure are you on email listservs with like the other defense attorneys in the Fulton County area where you kind of share cases and things like that? But that's basically it for a centralized database.
Right. And as a member of the press, I mean, you would even the local press, I don't even know how they would, if they wanted to find other cases, that you would have to almost figure out who the attorney was and figure out how to get that information. There's nothing centralized. And of course, there's privacy concerns and everything else with it just being all public. If I went to trial for accused of something very bad and I was acquitted, I don't know if I'd want the public just to be able to look me up and my case up at any time, because, even when you're acquitted, people think a certain thing. So I don't know what the answer is, but yeah, there's no centralized information to kind of get at some of these things. And then, once in a while you say, oh yeah, I've dealt with that officer, but you run into another attorney. I've dealt with that officer before, this is what happened. And you kind of get information that way, but it's really, you got to do your digging and your due diligence. And even then you need some luck and you need someone else that's willing to cooperate to give you information.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah, great. Well, I'm trying to see if we have some questions in the chat here. We've talked about just kind of the unknowns going forward in terms of a bail motion, because like you said, a bail motion is kind of filed on the assumption that the trial is going to continue. And there's some hope here that it won't continue. It's just how you force that to be remains to be seen. Is that
right? And there's not specifically an order one way or the other that it needs to be done. I'm just, quite honestly, I'm digesting this stuff along with everyone else, and I'm figuring out where we go from here. So I haven't made any strong decisions one way or another about that.
It's one thing you also learn from just seeing all these cases is, while the law, it seems like it would be objective, and in some areas it definitely is, it's also very subjective. And I think we saw that even in the reactions to this meeting that happened. Like I sent the transcript to a really experienced judge here, and he was in Orange County trial courts forever, and he's actually on the appellate court now. And he read it, and he said that he thought the basis for the meeting might have been okay, but he thought it went way beyond what would have happened in his court. But I thought, he made the point of saying his court just because it almost does kind of come down to personal preference in some regard. But then we had Judge Krause basically endorse what happened and say that it could have and perhaps should have happened in open court, but she seemed to endorse the propriety of it. Whereas, here's a judge in Orange County who read it and thought it went way beyond anything that happened. Are you guys anticipating those same kind of like subjective issues if you're arguing for a mistrial or a double jeopardy, or is it a little more clear cut in that regard?
Well, trying to think how I can put this diplomatically.
You don't need to be diplomatic.
In the transcript, certain things were said or strongly suggested about me and another attorney or two other attorneys that are incredibly, incredibly false and offensive. Yeah. And you can look at the transcript and know what I'm talking about.
The implication that you're somehow working with Melnick.
The way I followed the rules of professional conduct of Georgia were pristine. And I did exactly what I'm supposed to do. And somehow that's twisted in a meeting that I have I'm not invited to something other than that, that's offensive. And that's also the purported, as I understand it, reason for the meeting. And it doesn't even get off the ground without that untruth. And I know the truth. I'm not gonna, if someone wants to make formal accusations, I'll answer them and I'll have plenty to say after that. But what was said on that transcript was a gross mischaracterization of what happened. And that's where I don't, when we're talking about an ex parte meeting, the problem is when the referee, or in this case, a judge, is only as good as the information that they're getting. And if you're only hearing from one side and that information is incorrect and misleading, then it leads to absurdity. And that's where we're at with that meeting. So to me, that's the issue, is there was a meeting and one side was able to give a rendition of events that was completely false and misleading and offensive to me and named me, and there was no truth to it. And that was the purported reason behind the ex parte meeting to begin with. So that's the problem with ex parte meetings.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, another judge I talked to pointed out that he has a seminar that he teaches on the dangers of ex parte. I'm like, well, this would be a good example to use for that, I think.
Right.
What are some other, I mean, this was obviously the biggest issue of the case, but it seems like the sheer size of the case is another thing. But I mean, what are some other things that stand out about this trial to you, just in terms of your experiences with it, or something unusual in terms of legal issues?
Well, I mean, there's RICO.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to think, but I don't do much federal work. Maybe that's in my future, but as of right now, I don't do much federal work.
Oh. Oh, looks like you froze up there. We'll see if we get him back. Max, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you were saying, and that reminded me, because especially when you're doing these interviews live, sometimes you get a question and then it goes away, so you throw in a Phil question just to get him to talk. So you can think
well, that's why Mr. Kokomo's here, because he's in charge of the audio visual. And now okay, you're back. You were froze up on mine. You got me?
Okay. Yeah. I can see you, and I feel like I'm good.
So
but
anyone that's watching the trial and has seen Mr. Kokomo in charge of the audio visual, he's in charge of this too. So there's no surprise that we're running into some issues.
Yeah.
I get to make fun of Shaq because he's my buddy.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I think we can anticipate some filings this week from Doug Weinstein, but at least, and there's got to be more motions coming, but it's also just kind of wait and see what this judge does in terms of scheduling, right? I mean, are we waiting to see how fast she schedules something, or how fast you hear from her? Oops. Are you there? See if he gets back on. Probably about time to wrap it. And when he gets back on, I want to ask him about the Georgia's unique use of RICO, because we don't see that in California, like RICO charges brought against like court reporters for padding their court transcripts and everything. But oh, here we go. Mr. Kokomo, hello. The celebrity himself, the worldwide celebrity.
Man,
Explain
the
to us.
female viewership is skyrocketed.
Exactly. No, people are stoked. So you are the evidence guy. You're the exhibit guy, more like the technology guy. What's your official job title?
So for sure, I'm a legal assistant. I worked with Max. I've known Max for at least, I want to say 6 or 7 years.
I think longer than that.
Yeah, I met in high school. I worked with this program which paired me with Max. I've always wanted to be a defense attorney, so they put me at the Fulton County's public defender's office as a legal assistant, and I've been working with Max ever since. And I ended up going to Georgia State University, studied political science, graduated from there, and now I'm going to law school next year. So right now I'm studying for the LSAT. So
Nice.
during this trial, I've been while y'all were doing that, I was kind of studying a little.
Yeah, well, it seems like with a decent LSAT score and all your experience, you should have a lot of doors open for you. I mean, they should be clamoring to try to get you to sign up. But so what's the plan? I mean, how many cases do you have to work on? Is there kind of a relief that there's a pause right now because you've got such a other caseload to get to, or what do you do?
There is, I have been so unbelievably surprised I thought when I was involved in this case, I have some clients that are in jail. And if I was in jail and my attorney was involved in this case, I would feel a certain way. I've gone to see my clients again and again and again and say, you're important too, but I just can't try your case right now. These are people awaiting trial. And the grace and understanding that my clients have shown has really been shocking. And some of them say, oh, we see you on TV, man. We see you on TV. You're doing your thing. And it's just blown me away how understanding some of my other clients have been. It makes me sad that I'm not able to actively try their case at this moment, but it's just been. And the other thing is the other judges, especially in Fulton County, they have caseloads. They have reports that say how many cases are open. They have to deal with families sometimes showing up in court complaining things taking too long, alleged victims complaining things have taken too long, and the judges in Fulton County have been unbelievably kind and understanding to me through this process, and I really appreciate that. And they haven't given me a hard time at all. They know where I've been, but that's made the whole process a lot easier. But yes, I am working on my clients' cases along with this case right now. I had court this morning. I was able to obtain the release of 2 of my clients. So that was great. So I'm just continuing to move forward and trying to use this time wisely.
Yeah. Congratulations. Were those bail motions or how did
they were bond motions.
Yeah. I saw Doug Weinstein commented on Twitter a while back. I think he'd gotten bond for a defendant, and that it was just the kind of night and day difference between that process and the process he'd gone through with YSL. Because I actually just did an interview with Dateline NBC's podcast is doing something on this, and I was trying to explain the bond process, but it happened really before I started covering the trial. I mean, there was an initial bond hearing and then a reconsideration, but was there anything after that? I mean, it was kind of thought to be a lost cause after that with Glanville.
Other than one of the individuals, Miles Farley, he was granted bond later on. But you said something important that I want to go back to. So you're telling me that Doug Weinstein was on Instagram bragging about getting one of his clients released. Is that what you're telling me?
Twitter. It was something like that. I remember he was contrasting it with like, it's so nice to be in a court where, you know, justice prevails or something, and his client can be out preparing for trial or
humble bragging. I'm going to have to talk to Doug about. I'm going to confront him about that.
Yeah. Well, you know, I one question I have to ask you. I think you're on Twitter active as Max something, but when I first looked you up, when I was looking up all the attorneys on opening statements day, I saw the not guilty ATL handle for Twitter, and it's like been dormant since 2011. But I'm like, what can you do to get that account back? That's a pretty good handle.
Yeah, well, that's what I was told. I signed up for that when I knew nothing about Twitter, and I just made that my name. And then people that knew more said, "Oh, that's a great handle." And then I didn't even know how to tweet. So that was like from like many years ago. So maybe I need to start with that. But if you follow me, I'm into legal stuff sometimes. I don't talk too much, but I'm mostly about the New York Knicks. Okay. So I'm FKA, formerly known as, and is usually play one of the players I like or pay one of the players I like or things like that. It's very Knick centric. So I probably confuse my fellow Knick fans with some of the legal interests that I have, and I probably confuse some of the people that are interested in legal stuff with my random musings about the New York Knicks. But
well, my reporter friend at the LA Times, James Quealy, could talk with you for hours. He's a huge Knicks fan. He's from New Jersey and just had a baby and is bombarding him with all this baby Knicks stuff. But I think I saw something. Yes. You're also a baseball fan, right?
I am a baseball fan, big baseball fan. That's something that myself and Brian have in common. Yankee fans.
Do you guys go to Braves games at all?
We went to a Brave game not too long ago and had a great time. So yeah, I'm into that. I'm into baseball cards. I'm like maybe an adult during the day and kind of have some childlike qualities. Well, with some of my interests and hobbies, sports, baseball cards, things of that nature. But I have a 9-year-old son, so that's
perfect. Well, I recently moved to downtown LA, so I can get to Dodger Stadium really quick. So I've been going to as many Dodgers games as I can there. Yeah, it's nice. The Red Sox are this weekend, and then the Giants roll into town soon. You gotta look up the schedule and go to all the fans.
I once, and this is another nerdy thing. I went to spring training, you know, while all the other guys that were 20 something were going to like Daytona Beach for bike weeks and stuff. I went to spring training where like the average age is like 65. And I saw a Dodger game in Vero Beach, I think it is. And it was really something because it was just a Dodger blue everywhere. It was amazing. I'll never forget that.
Yeah. Well, realistically though, how much time have you had for that over the last, year and a half, or gosh, how long has it been? Because it just seems like while we all know it hasn't been every day and it's a very leisurely comfort break schedule, you are still basically on call every day. Right. And the idea that when the trial's over, you just go home and forget about it. I mean, you need to prepare for the next day.
Right. And that's what, when people say, oh, well, this case is not moving quick, or, they're not working that hard. And I don't think they're talking about the defense attorneys, but I'd almost rather be in court than be out of court waiting for further instructions, or because at some point when you really care about what you're doing, you can't get it out of your head, and you just end up spending more and more time obsessing about it as opposed to just getting in there and getting it done and moving on to the next thing. So,
Yeah.
right. So we haven't necessarily had a set schedule that you could really rely on. So yeah, things like vacations and family vacations and things like that have kind of gone the wayside this summer, which I hate because, as a father, I'm never going to get those times back. But it's just the reality right now.
Yeah. One thing I was reminded reading the comments, somebody asked about Mundo. And I don't know if you want to talk about this too much, but you were the one attorney who did bring this up in testimony once, where you asked about Fonnie Willis not charging Mundo. And can you talk about that at all? Is there some kind of something unknown that jurors aren't hearing here?
I mean, I think everyone kind of knows it's. I don't think I necessarily hit it or left too many dots to connect. He was formerly represented by the district attorney, and I think many people have said he's allegedly a founding member of whatever we want to call YSL. I certainly don't call it a criminal street gang, but and then he's not on this indictment. So I mean, that's just, there's not too much else to say about it. I was interested in that. That's why I asked the question. It was, I think at some point it was objected to. So we weren't able to get into it further.
Well, I guess it just remains to be seen what happens with the case from here and, where it goes. But like you were saying, there's different ideas about where you could go from here, and it just kind of remains to be seen. But is it safe to say we can expect to see filings from you this week, or no?
I'm not sure what the timeline of everything is to definitively answer that question. There are definitely some next steps that need to be taken, whether that takes the form of everyone filing an individual motion, or whether that takes the form of some lawyers filing a motion and other lawyers joining in or supporting that motion or supporting the research. I don't know how that's going to be. So I can guarantee you there's going to be filings that I agree with and I support. I don't know if it's going to officially say filed by Max Schardt, or it will say another attorney. That's yet to be determined.
Yeah. Somebody was asking about Birdman and Lil Wayne, and my understanding is Lil Wayne they're not going to call him, but I think Birdman was still technically on the witness list. All that is up in the air now, but
right.
Is that right?
I don't have any inside information, and really, I mean, kind of where I stand on a lot of these things, especially people in the public sphere. I don't, these people have enough people talking about them. I'm not going to jump on and pile on with my theories on that stuff. I just leave it alone. But I know that I think maybe both of them, or at least Brian Williams, was on the witness list, but I have no information other than that.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like if this ever does get to the point where you're presenting defense witnesses, can we expect a pretty robust defense? I mean, are we going to be seeing pretty substantive witnesses from you?
I'm not going to answer that question respectfully.
Sure. I can respect that. And that's one thing you notice when you're doing reporting over the years, is just like the different levels of openness from lawyers. And some lawyers really do seem to never even consider what's best for their client. They're just talking to you about everything. And it's like, does your client even know you're talking to me right now? So right. I definitely can, it's torn, because as a journalist, you're kind of trained to expect openness from everything. But when you're working in the legal system, you learn how different people's roles are. You have a much right. different role than just advocating for openness in the press. So
right. And and you choose who you talk to. And so, the last thing I want to do is jeopardize in any way the success we're having on behalf of Mr. Stillwell. So I think that your viewers understand, Max doesn't want to answer this. There's a reason behind it. And my, I will, of course, I want people to like me and all the rest. I'm no different than any other human, but in this particular context, everything has to take a back seat to Shannon.
Yeah.
And I'd have it no other way.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. So hey, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else you wanted to say, or something you want to make sure we're all thinking about as we're kind of going forward here into the unknown?
No, I just appreciate, honestly, the interest that people have had in this case. I know that in some ways this is a high profile case, and it involves Jeffery Williams, also known as Young Thug, and I appreciate that is the source of a lot of the interest. But I really appreciate the people that care about Jeffery Williams, but also care about Shannon and Lil Rod. And, I always say Lil Rod because he always, I'm not going to share them, but I have so many stories about Lil Rod that I'll never forget.
Well, in the very beginning, and one thing when you're looking at this, because his nickname's Little Rod, but like, it seems like everybody, there's multiple nicknames for everybody, because there's another Little Rod. And then just when you look at the caliber of the prosecutors and the quality of this indictment, I'm like, did they charge that 19-year-old because they thought he was this other Little Rod? And they will just never now.
Yeah, I don't think that's what happened, but I just you get to know these guys, and it's so much different than what is written on paper. And someday maybe I'll be able to share some things. Hopefully I will, but a lot of these guys, all of them, Mr. Nichols, I'm super fond of. All of them. Every day I make it a point, and I'm not the only attorney to go spend time with everyone, not because it's some grand conspiracy or plan, just because I see these gentlemen every day, and they need human interaction. And it's I look forward to seeing them. So just to all the fans of Jeffery, keep rooting for Jeffery, but also keep rooting for the rest of the guys. And to the fans of Mr. Kokomo, keep him in your thoughts on his LSAT. That's what we really need. We need Mr. Kokomo to knock this LSAT out of the park as well. So prayers up for him as well.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, maybe 3 years of law school later, we could see Mr. Kokomo at the lectern one of these days.
Oh, as long as he's not practicing with me. That's it's just I at some point I gotta shed him. But I've known him since he was 17. But yeah, no, I'm very proud of Shaq, and he's doing a great job. And I try not to let all this his fame get to his head, but he's doing a great job. So.
And then you work with is it Mr. Botts? He's he doesn't have much of a speaking role at the lectern, but he had, I think, one of my favorite moments in trial where Glanville was just laying into him, and he was just like, "Well, that's fine, sir." Like,
I'm almost ashamed to have gone this far without mentioning Mr. Botts. Mr. Botts sits next to me, so I often don't think of him as one of the other attorneys, because I almost view him as me in some ways, and kind of connected to him. But Mr. Botts is very important and very much appreciated by myself and by Shannon. So yeah, definitely people, I think they started calling him YSL grandpa or something, but Mr. Botts is the man, and I appreciate him. And he's another, I didn't know Mr. Botts personally before this case. So he's another person that I met through this process. He bought a very thoughtful gift for my son that he loved, and he always wants to do things with us. So he's a big part of this, and we appreciate Mr. Botts too.
I kind of when I first started covering trials, you learn that Skadden Arps is doing the defense, and they have like 10 associates sitting in the gallery, and they don't look like they're doing anything, and maybe they're not, but they are doing a lot after the trial. They're helping with all the filings, they're listening to everything, and they're participating in the strategy meetings. Is that what Botts is doing? I mean, we don't hear from him in trial, but afterwards, he's talking to you about everything that he heard, strategy wise.
Yeah, Mr. Botts is always someone to run things by, and the other thing is, it's not only legal stuff. Sometimes, people say, "Oh, Max, people are picking on you, this and that." I've done things wrong during this trial, and Mr. Harvey, Bruce Harvey, and Mr. Botts, who have the experience, they've looked at me and said, "Max, chill out. Max, relax."
Yeah.
And so I got those two on each side of me that are always keeping me straight and giving all of us guidance. So we appreciate them as well.
Great. Well, hey, thank you so much. This was great. I think we could just talk forever, but I think you've probably got other things to do. There's a lot of work to be done, and hopefully we can catch up later when there's some developments. I know everyone's so interested in this case, and I had to kind of get on somebody on Twitter last night because obviously there is a lot of other stuff going on in the world, but this is an important case, and it's just, people who aren't interested in rap or, are just obsessed with the fact that the defendant's name is Young Thug don't seem to understand like the implications of this case for the criminal justice system. So I think anything we can do to, keep shedding light on it is good. Even
if we're not going to get this right, then we're certainly not going to get it right for, someone that's not a celebrity where the cameras aren't on the trial the whole time. So yeah, we need to get this right.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you. I'm going to make sure I tell Doug that you said that this was a far more interesting interview than you had with him. I'm going to make sure I tell him.
Some horrible things to say about him. Yeah. So, well, great. Well, hey, thank you so much. And Shaq Kokomo, good luck on the LSAT. You're going to nail it. Keep us updated if you can.
Thank you so much for the interview.
Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. That was great. That went on a lot longer than I thought. It's always like in the very beginning, you're kind of like, oh, how's this going? But we really hit it off. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I think that was great. I'm going to see if I can splice it out into some videos that kind of show each section and everything. So stay tuned for more. Obviously there's going to be a lot of developments. Doug Weinstein says he's going to file some stuff this week, and we'll see what's going on. So thank you guys so much. Give it a like, and shout out to everybody on the replay. Thank you.